another episode of ExpaTalk with me, Natasha Tynes from Maryland, the United States of America. Good afternoon, Natasha.
Good afternoon, Zyad. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you so much. Today we have exceptional guest. He's a writer, he's an activist, and he's an amazing man. I had the privilege and honor to meet with him yesterday, and we talked, and it was a very, very beautiful conversation. I enjoyed it so much. And Madian Al-Jazerah, our guest for today, even many years, I think, before yesterday. So, can you tell us briefly about that? How do you meet Madian and what do you know about him?
Yeah, of course. So, Madian is a dear friend. I've known him for over 20 years. I met him when I was still in college. I was probably 20 years old. And I heard about the cafe that he and his family are opening. It's called Books at Cafe. It's a coffee shop plus a bookshop. And since I like books and I was really interested, and I visited the cafe and I loved it. And then I started working there, which is back then it was unusual for a young woman still in college to actually get another job while studying.
Yeah,
And it was a wonderful place. I felt like right at home. It was very inclusive. The food was amazing. The books were great. The coffee was great music, great people. And then I met Midian and his brother Mazhar. And until now, they were the first people who gave me my very first job. I learned a lot from them, and I really love the culture surrounding the Books at Cafe. And every time I go back to Amman, I make sure to visit that wonderful, unique place. And I'm so happy that we're going to talk to Midian today. I just finished his amazing book. It's so wonderful. It's so raw. It's so emotional. It's so real. And, to hear his life story, his work. And I have
that,
so many
that was
questions for
that
him.
was
Yeah.
really amazing experience to read the book. Are you this or are you this? This is the title of his book, which we are going to explore today and highlight upon so many issues in the book. I know you have more questions than I do regarding the book because you have already read it. Unfortunately, I haven't, but I have read the reviews about the book. So I'm also prepared to ask him some questions about the book, in addition to other issues regarding identity, the sexual identity, and finding yourself, and especially coming out to your family and the community as a gay person or a person who's attracted to same sex, whether men or women. So, this is a very big issue, especially in the Middle East. And this is a great opportunity that we can discuss it with this man who has written a lot about identity and discovering oneself. So, without any further ado, I think it's time to start our program. We just want to tell our audience that we're live on Facebook pages ExpaTalk and Zyad, Tariq, Rasheed, and Natasha Tynes. Also, we are live on YouTube right now, Zyad, Tariq, Rasheed, and ExpaTalk. So please feel free to ask questions and comment on the show, and we will give time to respond to your hellos and messages and comments with our dear guest. So after 30 seconds exactly, we will start the conversation with Madian Al-Jazerah. So welcome all. ExpaTalk is a podcast run by Natasha Tynes and Zyad Tariq Rasheed, two journalists of Arab origin based in North America. The podcast focuses on issues related to Arab affairs and of interest to Arabs across the globe. We interview entrepreneurs, artists, luminaries, and those who are working on exciting endeavors. Join us on this adventure as we talk to those who inspire us and make us think differently about the world. The podcast streams live on YouTube and can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud. And we're back. I think, Natasha, now it's a good time to invite our guest to the studio and start communicating with him. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest for today, Mr. Madian Al-Jazerah. Hello, Madian.
Hi, Zyad. Hi, Natasha. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity and good morning for you.
Good evening to
Good
you.
evening.
You're joining us from
Exactly.
Amman, Jordan, and we're here in Canada and the United States. So, Madian, welcome and congratulations on your new book. Unfortunately, I haven't read the book yet, but I'm very, very, very excited to read it. And by the way, I have ordered a copy last night on Amazon, so
That's
hopefully
good.
it's gonna come tomorrow. So I will be happy to read it and give you my feedback later on it. So, Median, tell us a brief idea about the book before we dive into further details about it.
Well, first of all, really, thank you for this opportunity.
Oh,
It's
you're
very
welcome.
important.
You're very welcome.
I think it's important. It's an important subject. Although this is a memoir and it's about me, but it I think it applies to so many people. And this is not an LGBTQ memoir or subject on its own. It's a book on identity and worth and how you are valued and how you as a person, and this applies to a lot of people, your identity is at limbo. You know, where are you? What are you? Are you this or are you this? By being Palestinian, by being Jordanian, by being born in Kuwait and not being a Kuwaiti, by being a Muslim but feeling like Islam's been taken away from me. There's so much ambiguity. You grow up with it, and this is what this book is about. It's my stories through life that kept me asking this question of are you this or are you this.
So let's go straight to the title of the book. Are you this or are you this? Why did you choose this title and what does it mean to you? Because for people who don't know the maybe anecdotal story or the personal story that you put in that title, wouldn't be able to realize what it meant by the title of the book. So, can you explain to me and to our dear audience what is meant by "Are you this" or "Are you this"?
Absolutely. First of all, brace yourself because it's a it's a controversial title.
It
But
is.
it is such. I think it's a very important question that talk. Yani, it's a question my mother struggled with for a long time to ask me when I came out to the family, and of course as Arab parents, as Muslim parents, and living in the Middle
I'm
East,
sorry if you don't mind me interrupting. At what age did you come out to your family?
to my family. I think I was about 32, 33,
At
around that
a
time.
young
Oh, so
age.
I younger age. I'm 56 now. I've given
Yes.
that away now. But I was older, more mature. You know, the stuff was happening, and I was put in a corner where I needed to come out and to explain the situation I was going through. I had to come out to my parents, which
Mhm.
was not this is something. This is like every gay man's fear. Uh, we grow up lying about what we feel and what we think and what our attractions are because everything around us tells us it's a taboo, it's wrong, it's against God, it's against culture. So we grow up with we do not grow up with a template that fits us, and that's where the difficulty comes. So Mama struggled, really struggled with this, and finally, she followed me to New York City to ask me that question. And her question, طبعا, she's fidgeting, and she's unable. The words are not coming out. My mom is such a lady. Yani the words were not coming out. So she used the gestures, and she phrased it this way. And she said, "Ma, just explain this to me. Are you this here, or are you
Okay.
this? And to her, and to many people, that's the first thing they question, and they think that, being a gay man is about this. It's about sex, and it isn't. We romanticize as well. We love like you love, like heterosexual people love. We are attracted the same way. We are emotionally attracted the same way. We're looking for love as well. We're looking for respect as well. And what Mama asked, I thought at first she was worried about, my manhood and all of that. But in actuality, later on, I realized that what she's worried about is my value as a human being, like any mother or any father. That is what they worry about the most. Is my son? Does my son have the value? Will he maintain the value of being a man? And we all know that, you know, that people always. I mean, this whole issue of a poker and a pokey, as rash as it is not a homosexual thing. It's actually, it opens up doors or about patriarchy, masculinity, matriarchy, feminism. It really brings in a lot of subjects together. But this "are you this" and "are you this" wasn't just that. When she asked that question, I sat back, but then went through my life and realized the "are you this" and "are you this" question applies to so many parts of my life. Me being a Palestinian, me being Palestinian, but I have no country. Carrying a Jordanian passport, but I never lived in Jordan. Now I do, and I love it, and I'm just beginning to feel Jordanian, and I'm loving it. Being a Muslim, but this is not the Islam I grew up with. I grew up with a totally different Islam than what we see now at the age of 56 for me. So it's the issue of "are you this" or "are you this" is about the multiple identities, that are compounded under this title and this book. This book isn't just about my sexuality. It's about everybody else's questions
Yes.
on who they are as Arabs.
Yes. Being a member of the LGBTQ community in the Arab world, people get stripped of so many rights and privileges. Um, and you mentioned that in our previous conversation when we talked offline, you mentioned something really, really interested, and it caught my attention, and I really wanted to ask you about it today. You said Islam was stolen from me, as many other things. So you've mentioned the nationality issue, the belongingness, and you touched upon that particular issue, the religious aspect as well. Can you highlight more, and what did you mean by Islam was stolen from me?
Um, uh, Islam, I feel it has been robbed, and I've been robbed of my Islam. I was born and
In
raised in
what way?
Kuwait.
In what way?
Um, I'll explain that in hell as we speak. I was
Okay.
born and raised in Kuwait,
Okay.
to a Muslim family, to a Palestinian Muslim family. We are Palestinian. We are Palestinians. We carry Jordanian passports, and I was born in Kuwait. And the Islam we grew up with, and I'm 56, mind you. So up until 35 years, 30, whatever, 8 years ago, up until I was 19, for example, I had never seen the hijab. And then suddenly the hijab kicked in. That's the visual part of Islam. Fasting was the most beautiful thing. Ramadan was so festive, so exciting, and now it's become, if you're seen eating in most Islamic countries, if you're seen eating publicly, you get kind of, you get arrested, you get penalized for it. The loving approach that I grew up with Islam, in Islam, the approach of love has now become the approach of fear. We're now being scared into things. If you do this, you're going to hell. You do that, you're going to hell. You're going to burn. You're going to burn in hell. It's all about scaring you into a religion, instilling fear, rather than what I grew up in, and in my opinion, that's the real Islam, is the Islam of love. I grew up
Do you feel,
loving it.
yeah, do you feel that some individuals have appointed themselves as custodians or guardians to the principles and the religions, and becoming to act in the society as guards or policemen or religious police, so to speak, against people who you mentioned, like where practicing iftar publicly, or I'm fasting, or I'm praying on time, whereas these things did not exist in the past as you grew up as an Arab and Muslim person in the Middle East?
Of course, there are lots of people in all religions and in all issues. People take it upon themselves to become the custodians of a particular mission or ideology or religion.
Yes.
So this is happening all over the world. So this is not a Muslim thing or an Arab thing, but this is exactly what happened. The interpretations. I think the Quran is the same Quran. So how come now it's one thing and before that it was something else? So obviously it's the interpretations, and it's not Islam itself. It is not the Quran itself. It is the interpretations that people have taken upon themselves to gain power or to gain whatever their reasons are. This is something that's really now moving towards politics, which this book isn't about. But when we saw hijab, I was 19, I remember, and we were in Kuwait, and I turned around and I looked we saw a few women who were dressed up in the typical hijab, the scarf that was tight across the face.
Mm-hmm.
Now we grew up with the hishmi. Our women, some women would wear the scarf loosely. As a Palestinian, as a Levantine, our women used that. And it was not, it was not Islamic. It was across the board. It was a cultural thing. But these women did not resemble any of the cultures that I knew. And we were travelers when we were young. My father, Allah yarhamu, took us everywhere. So we went to a British school, with 52 nationalities, and we grew up in a school where we were exposed to so much variety of nationalities and cultures.
Okay.
And this was something I had never seen. And I remember turning around to Mama and telling her, Mama, where are these people from?
Mm-hmm.
Even my mom was, gave that side look. It's like, Habiba, I don't know.
Skeptical.
We didn't know. We were skeptical. We didn't know. We could not pin the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Only to realize that this was started to increase and increase and increase, and suddenly our women were covered.
Yes.
And the
so
this is a
yes,
a sensitive subject.
Yeah, the book in itself is talks about a lot of other issues other than religion, identity, personality, belongingness, and whatnot. So I think now maybe Natasha has some questions to ask, and maybe she can dive in further in the book with you, because I still have some other questions, but not particularly related to the book, because I haven't read the book honestly yet. So Natasha, please go ahead.
Read it.
Sure. Sure.
I will. I promise. It's gonna come tomorrow. I ordered it last night from Amazon.
Okay.
I
So
promise.
it's an amazing book. It's a very fast read. I mean, when you start, you can't stop. I couldn't stop. So honestly, one of as I said, the book is very emotional, very raw, and it makes you sad and makes you happy. It's like lots of mixed emotions. And one thing that really struck with me is you have one line at the end when you mentioned about the Egyptian LGBT activist Sarah, who killed herself, and you said your biggest fear is you will be stoned to death. Is that actually a true fear, or are you really afraid for your life? Are you think that someday somebody's gonna come and kill you because of your sexual orientation?
it's every LGBTQ person's fear is to be ostracized and oppressed, and the highest form of fear is to be killed for who they are and what they are, and sometimes in the name of God, which is so unfortunate, because obviously, and I do not believe this is true at all. I think God is love, and in all religions, and just people are just use it. Yes, we have seen videos of in Iraq and in Afghanistan, when they just they bust a gay man, they carry they would carry this man to the highest point, highest tower that they would have, and they would tell him, "We're doing you a favor," and they would throw him from the top of the tower. And then if he's not dead, they'd stone him back to death until he was fully dead. You see that, we saw that in videos, in the 21st century. That is scary. And what happened to Sarah Higazi is not that different at all. This poor, I don't want to use the word poor, because to me, she's a hero. All she did was raise the flag. The simplest action. She raised the flag, and she got arrested. She got raped. She got beat up. She got dehumanized. They tore her apart. And this is what she could not handle it. She could not handle it. She's a symbol for all of us, and she represents every gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender and intersex and queer folks' fear is to be raped, is to be arrested, is to be tortured. It's everybody's fear. And for what? For raising a flag? Or for falling in love with the same sex? Homosexuality is not about sex only. It is no different than heterosexuality, except except that it's the same gender. We can love. We are looking for love. We are looking for partnerships. We are looking to raise kids when we can. We're not pedophiles like lots of people think. We have love to give, and we are able to receive love. It's not about sex only.
That's very powerful. Thank you, Madian. But how do you grapple with the fear? I mean, how do you go on about your life? How do you go to work? How do you go out with friends when you have this fear of just being killed for who you are? I mean, how life goes on?
It's not a fear that I really have in Jordan. I think Jordan is and it's the only Arab country that does not criminalize homosexuality. Okay, mind you, it does not protect it either. But Jordan is actually the easiest of most countries. There are stories here and there, but there are no stories of people taking a gay man up to the top of a tower and throwing them over. There is discrimination here and there when people are out, but it's not violent. It's not as violent as you would think, or as other countries. I don't fear for my life that much, really. I stated that this is everyone's fear. This is the ultimate fear, but I don't have that fear here in Jordan.
So after what happened to Sarah, you still ended your book with saying that you feel there is a bit of improvement, that there are more NGOs, that there are more, kind of activism. But even after what happened to Sarah, do you still think there's improvement when it comes to the LGBTQ community in the Arab world? Is there hope, or it's just hopeless? I mean, the stories that we hear are horrific, just horrific. And is there any end in sight? Yeah.
There has to be an end in sight. I think what's very important is, with communication, everything can happen. With discussion and dialogue, everything can progress. For the longest time, there was no vocabulary in Arabic There was no decent, respectable vocabulary to describe a homosexual, a heterosexual, a bisexual, a transgendered man, or a transgendered woman. In Arabic, there wasn't. All the terminology used was really quite degrading and below the belt. So when you have below the belt vocabulary, no one can have a decent, respectable conversation to talk about it. Hella, fortunately enough, the communities in the Arab world and the whole region have come together and have come up with this vocabulary to describe the different identities within sexuality in general, including heterosexuality. We didn't even have it in Arabic. We included that in there because it's a spectrum. And once we put this vocabulary down, we could then form sentences that were decent enough for everybody to discuss. And now, and there was, of course, the promotion of this vocabulary because it was new. And now it's being used. And as it's being used, dialogue is happening. There are a lot of people are seeking, not everybody, there's still a lot of resistance, but now that there's a vocabulary, there's a dialogue, there's discussion, there's room for progress. So I believe we'll get there. Alana, frankly, I think the Arab world is more tolerant and has always been more tolerant than the Western world on the issue of LGBTQ. It's just, when the West came in, they had to dissect it and they had to put everything into shelves. They needed to identify the heterosexual, the homosexual, the bisexual, the transgendered man, the transgendered woman, the intersex, the queer and questioning. So suddenly everybody started to feel, they needed to fit in a shelf. And then at the end of all of that discussion and dissection, they decided also that, sexuality is quite fluid. But the Arab world has always been fluid. We didn't need to hear that. We know, this has been happening in the Arab world and other, the rest of the world throughout history. This is not a disease. This is not something you pick up. It is not something you learn, and it is not a phase. It's a complex issue, but on another side, it's actually quite simple.
And you mentioned that you mentioned something that sort of blew my mind, which is if people in the audience know how Amman is divided, you have East Amman and West Amman, and West Amman is, like kind of true to its name, is the more westernized version of Amman, and people are more exposed to the West, while East Amman is, kind of down to earth, more, salt of the earth people, if you want to call them, and what you said in the book is that there's more acceptance of you as a gay man in East Amman than West Amman. That and people would come and attack you in English in West Amman for who you are, but West Amman are not, and people are more accepting, although they're not as exposed. But and that really blew my mind because I was expecting the total opposite.
As I said earlier, it's the West came in. They needed to dissect sexuality and put the shelves, and it's all in English. And in the western part of Amman is more money, more affluent, more traveled, and a lot of English speakers, and so we're open to all TVs in the West and the Americas, and so homophobia kicked in with that. Whereas in East Amman, they're still Arabs. They're still the warm, down to earth. They still, we are Arabs. We're passionate. We're so friendly. We're so intimate. I mean, we kiss each other 1,000,000 times a day. Same gender and different. It is not an issue. Men hold hands together because it is not an issue to be intimate. And hella now in the US and and the Western world, they call it bromance.
Bromance, yeah, bromance.
The whole Arab world, has been bromancing forever.
That's true. They still bromancing,
and they're still bromancing. And now the Western world needed to put they needed to put a masculine word to it, because they again, there's a bit of homophobia in that word, because God forbid that this bromance would take that one extra step and it becomes sexual. but in natural,
Yeah.
it's forget the word sexual, but one extra step that is intimate is what starts to happen,
Yeah.
and it's happening.
Yeah. Madian, do you mean by this explanation that homophobia is a borrowed idea that came from the West toward the Middle East, and that uh, the Middle Easterners, so to speak, have become homophobe once they get more open to the West, whereas in the past things were different and there was acceptance to LGBTQ communities in the Arab world?
I'm talking for myself, so it's not something I read, and it's not something I preach. It's just, I'm talking from my head and from what
Yeah.
I see. So I could be wrong, I could be, but that's my perspective. Um, uh, I think our cultures, the word homophobic came from the West. It's an English term. We had to translate that into Arabic, رهاب المثلية. So we had to translate that one as well, because it was never part of our conversation. And people created it, and at the end of the day, it's about masculinity. Again, and the book talks a lot about and insinuates how patriarchy has affected so much of the way we live, and so much of the way in the way we deal with each other, and so much in the way we judge each other and give value to each other. So this, to me, is a very masculine approach to intimacy. Um, uh, and highly influenced by patriarchy. And patriarchy is really the subject we should be talking about as well, because it is what has covered,
Hmm.
I think, our women. It is what has oppressed our women. It is what and mind you, with patriarchy, there's a set of value. There's a hierarchy of value. You have the male, the masculine male. Then you have the female, and she comes second in line, mind you, less than the
Hmm.
man, less than the male.
Yeah.
And then the gay man comes underneath, below the female. Why? Because to men, to males, a gay man, because that's their perspective, they don't understand sexuality or gender. They think that a gay man is someone who wants to be a woman. No, someone who identifies as a woman, a male who identifies as a woman, is a transgender woman, not a gay man. And a gay man is a man. I'm a man. I'm emotionally and physically attracted to other men. But to this scale, this patriarchal scale, I am viewed as a man who has betrayed his right to be masculine and to be a man by wanting to be a woman. So I become less in value. And this is where my mom's question was. She was worried about my value. Am I going to be less of a man in the eyes of everybody? How are people going to treat me being less than a man in this society? And that's
How,
the
how
main.
does how does that concept impact or affect the gay man or the lesbian women themselves when the society treats them like that? How do they react, or how do they become? Are they going to become the persons that the society is patronizing them to become? This is a very important question in my mind. I think
Um,
I have to ask
I'm
it.
trying to understand it a little more. You're talking
So,
about the
so if the
the.
society belittles them and treats them as a third degree human beings, are they going to become like that? Are they going to become a third degree? They will feel this
This is
inferiority
oppression.
that is imposed on them by the society.
I talk a lot in the book about, not a lot in certain places, because again, the book isn't just about that. It's about being a
Yeah,
Palestinian, about being displaced. It's
Mm.
about being,
sure.
being born in Kuwait and not being Kuwaiti. But along the line of the book, there's racism kicks in, and bullying, and control, and oppression. Um, uh, what happens with the LGBT community is that they are forced from a very young age to feel different. As I said, there's a template that is done for the heterosexual couple. As a child, you grow up and you look at your parents, and luckily enough, I have loving parents. So I learned to love from them. I had a great model to love, except there was a slight difference, is that I kept emotionally having more of an emotional affinity towards the boys in my class rather than the girls. I loved the girls, but the romantic part of it was more towards the boys. And there was no example or someone to look up to, or a template designed for me to look at that resembles my feelings. So growing up, every child who is from the LGBTI community grows up feeling different. They may not have the vocabulary or even the sense to organize it into a sentence and say, yeah, oh, that's because I'm like that. They don't. They start from a very young age to feel different, and to feel like, because they feel different and not the same as everybody else and as they are supposed to, they start to feel less. They start to feel less loved, a little more inferior. In sometimes, in one sense or another, it's racism, hidden and embedded. It's very oppressive. A lot of people grow up feeling shame as they grow older, because we all know, the moment I tell someone I'm a homosexual, the first bubble above their head is two men fornicating. That's the first thing they're gonna think. Sex. They're not gonna think I could be in love. They think sex. They don't think romance. They don't think emotion. So
I think usually,
so it
yeah,
becomes a
sorry, but
shameful act.
it's
Go ahead.
usually men who think. I think men are the one who usually think men fornicating. I think for women, at least for me, that's not the first thing that women think when they think about it. I think it's again back to the patriarchy. I think that's the view of men mostly thinking that when you say a homosexual. I think it's
Yes.
it's also a masculine view as well of it, rather than a universal view.
Because masculinity rules, and that's patriarchy.
Yeah.
And this is what
Yeah.
our biggest problem, I think, in society is this.
Yeah.
This masculinity,
exactly.
this enforced masculinity.
It's men who immediately think of the sexual act when you say homosexual. I think for women, at least, maybe the first thing is they think, how are you going to survive in life? How are you going to have kids? Or that's probably the other view, is not immediately the sexual part. I think is like how people are going to treat you. It's really different view of it between man and woman when it comes.
It probably is, and nobody can really tell. And who am I to say that I know exactly what the bubble is above every man or every woman? People are different and people are unique. So I don't have percentages. I don't have research on it.
Yeah.
It's just me talking.
Yeah.
My personal opinion.
And also, if I want to add on the same topic, is one thing that you mentioned in the book that I never heard about, which is what's happening to the refugees in Jordan who are part of the LGBTQ community. How come we never heard about them? How come it's still hidden in the media? And the fact that these people have nowhere to go because they're stuck in refugee camp. And I read about your activism and how you helped them, and how you lobbied for their cases, but what's happening with them? This is yet another. If you think homosexuals are like second or third degree citizens, these are probably fourth or fifth, because on top of being the refugees, they're also homosexuals. So there's yet another situation to deal with.
And the refugee issue is very, very big. أنا being a Palestinian, I'm a refugee. It's in an inherited refugee status. And then being a Palestinian from Kuwait and having to leave Kuwait to move to Jordan, that's an actual, right? And my poor parents, refugees twice.
Mhm.
So the refugee mentality is there, and which is that of survival. You learn to survive. You learn all the tools to survive, and one of the horrible tools of survival as a refugee is you learn to take the short end of the stick. You always take the any deal, because in your head you're not in a position to pick and choose. I'll take whatever deal you give me. I will take, because I need to survive, which on its own is very compounding and very adds to the pressure and the oppression that we feel. For the LGBT refugees, it's a double whammy. One, they're already refugees, so that's traumatic right there. And
Mm.
then they're LGBT. And thank God for UNHCR, and thank God for other, uh,
Agencies.
donor countries and agencies and whatever, because this is what has happened. That the refugees have been, there was a method to identify each other for communication, and these refugees are actually, the LGBT refugees are actually high on the list of resettlement, which is a good thing. So
Mhm.
they are being taken care of, because of exactly what you were insinuating, that it is even more difficult for them. One, they're refugees. Two, they're also LGBT, the double whammy of oppression. But they are taken care of. There are channels, and they get they get resettled in different countries.
And
Madian,
sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
No,
Madian,
sorry, just follow up on it. And I heard about these cases where people sort of abuse the case of actual real LGBTQ refugees, and they pretend they are actually members of the homosexual community in order to get visas or get asylum. And I heard of these cases how they're abusing the actual real cases. Have you heard of these cases where people just pretend because they think, the West will immediately give them asylum if they pretend they're gay or
I
homosexual or
have I have. It's there. Some of them, in fact, it's some of them don't just claim that they're gay. Some of them claim that they're transgender as well, and they put on the whole show. But you know what? When you're a refugee, and I'm not saying it's right, but when you're a refugee and you've hit a wall, and that's you've lost everything. People get desperate and they'll do anything. So we could say they would make up the stories, but you know what? You hear a lot of people making up a lot of other stories. My mom got killed, my dad got killed, then I got this, and they did this to me.
yeah,
At the end of the day, really should sit back and try to put ourselves in their places. Um, they've just lost everything. They have
Mm,
nowhere to go.
it's
They live in a
despair.
tent.
All of
In
this
an,
is happening
it's
out of despair.
mm.
it's despair, and when people are in the corner, they'll do anything.
Hmm.
And I don't think they should be ostracized, to be honest. Because
Yes.
you need
I
to
have,
survive.
yeah, I have another question, Madian, regarding the same issue, the LGBTQ refugees. Um, the vernacular, you have worked with a team of other activists with the United Nations, like the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and other United Nations agencies, to change the vernacular, the vocabulary, the terminology, the wording that is used to address the gay community. Because in the past, the term that was used to refer to an LGBTQ person was the word in Arabic shadh, which means abnormal, whereas,
Deviant.
or deviant, whereas you have changed it to the word mithli, which means someone who is attracted to the same sex, and that was a huge achievement that you worked on. Can you tell us more about this issue? Because I only heard a bit of it yesterday in our short conversation. So I want you to elaborate, please, if you can, on how did you change the United Nations vernacular in Arabic?
I did not change the United Nations vernacular.
I mean, work to change.
It was amazing that they jumped in and needed to do something and wanted to help, because at the end of the day,
How did it start? How did it
LGBT
start?
rights, yeah, LGBT rights are human rights, and human rights are also LGBT rights. It's part of it. Every human deserves to be treated with respect, and every human, regardless, deserves to be treated with respect. And for here in Jordan, it was very clear to you, to the staff, the first liners, the frontliners, and other agencies, that they were getting LGBT people. Some of them can't read and write, but they would recognize the tools that we used for them to come forward and say, "We're this. What is this? We're part of this."
Yes.
And this is also just to tell people that this is not an elitist movement. It is not a Western movement. This is a human issue. If every there's 7 to 10% of the world population is LGBTQI. So it's a large number, and they're there, and it has nothing to do with culture. It has nothing to do with having a very strong mother or a very weak father or any of that. It's there, but we won't go into that. What happened was that the LGBT people were being recognized, and most of them are Arab speaking, and it was very obvious that they were having a problem communicating. How do you communicate this with someone who has been displaced, probably beat up, probably lost half his family, other than losing his country, losing his money, losing his household, losing whatever?
Yes.
How do you talk respectably with someone like this when you wanted to talk, when you wanted to talk about sexuality? We didn't have the terms. And this is where I jumped in and I said, but we do have the terms. And all we did was to introduce the terminology. We in no way tried to influence anybody. We in no way were trying to go against religion or go against the system or anything. We were merely giving them the vocabulary so they could have a conversation that was, these conversations aren't just happening with males. A male and a male can pull it off, but if a male needs to talk to a female who happens to be gay or happens to be trans, then it gets a little more complicated. Respect is very important. And this is how we did it. It was just merely, it was as simple as, this is what this means in Arabic, and this is what it here is the explanation of it. And we did, and we translated everything from technical English. Homosexual, مثلي الجنس. Heterosexual, مغاير الجنس. It was like that. Literal translations. We didn't fluff it. We didn't glorify it. We gave it as it is, and it did well. It's amazing the number of people who, even on the islands, in the Greek islands, or the refugees who would risk their lives and their families' lives crossing the waters in the middle of the night, arriving at the Greek Isles. We had a flag for them, a badge that people wore that said, "You are safe here. Anta bi'aman huna." And they would look at some people, as I said, couldn't read, but they saw the flag, the rainbow flag, and they went for it and asked discreetly. And a lot of people were saved that way as well.
So also thanks to the United Nations, of course, thanks to you for addressing the issue and presenting the vocabulary to the UN, but also thanks for the United Nations willingness,
absolutely.
Yes. to accept it and embrace it, and advising its interpreters and translators to use this vocabulary.
And the support of the Western world and the other world, all the countries, the donor countries, and those countries that took and resettled all refugees, mind you, not just the LGBT refugees.
Yes.
So there's a lot of thanks there.
Exactly, yes. Natasha.
Yeah, Madian, since I'm an author myself, I've been thinking a bit about your writing process. I noticed you have a co-author, Ellen Giorgio, if I'm pronouncing her name right.
Yes, Georgia.
And
Yes.
Georgia. And why did you choose to have a co-author, and how did this process work?
I'm an architect. I'm not a writer.
Okay.
And I'm an architect, and I have a couple of restaurants, and I do a lot of things, and I'm an activist as well. Activist means anybody that comes to my doorstep, I will help. This is not an LGBTQ issue. Anyone that comes to my doorstep, I will step in as much as I can. Ellen Giorgio is a writer, and she studied journalism at Oklahoma State University, where I went. And she was working at the architectural school library. And her husband, Kullis, Allah yarhamu, he passed away a few years ago, was my teaching assistant for one semester. But then I saw Ellen, and we just hit it off. She's a little old, she's older than me shwayid. And I just followed her everywhere. And we have so much in common with the Cypriots and the occupation, being occupied Palestinians, with that mentality, the Cypriots. And then I grew up, our parents always telling me, those who will understand you are the Cypriots, the Irish, and the Armenians. We have that in common. Now with the Iraqis and the Syrians, and just pile it all up.
We are joining the club.
Pile it up now. But she's a writer, and through our friendship and all these years, there came a time after my father passed away where I needed to search for my identity. Who are we as Palestinians? Who are my grandparents? Because this is another stuff, a lot of stuff in the book that I talk about, the collective trauma that Palestinians had with the invasion and losing their properties, and trauma does a lot to you. But I'll get back to the subject. So I was after our ancestry. I needed to know who I was, where I came from, where did my dad come from. And we have 3 last names, for God's sake. And I needed to figure out which one is the right one. So I dug into all of this, and I felt like this was my whole identity was at stake. I needed to write something. I wrote a couple of chapters. I ended up talking to Ellen sometime, and I said, Ellen, I wrote something. And she said, oh, send it to me. She was living in LA at that time. So I sent her a few chapters, and I told her, look, I don't write well, but I have a story. And she calls me up and says, yep, you don't write well. But you put your ass on a plane and come to LA. We're writing this book. That's all she needed to say. I picked up, I swear, within a week, I was in LA. I did a few trips where I would spend a few days. I would talk, she would record. And because we're so close, she knows me so well. Mind you, had I written the book myself, it would have been doom and gloom. Palestinian, I mean, it's just going to come really heavy. And to her, she just said, you know what, Madian, I remember you being the butterfly, being so light, being full of humor and funny when you were much, much younger, and we're going to write it in this tone. I refuse to see you in the current tone. That sentence alone, therapy right there. She's an amazing, amazing woman, and she crafted this book beautifully, in my opinion. Because
she did a great job. Yeah, she did a great job.
Everybody that's read it knows I said it. She captured my personality in there in such a way that even when I started to reread what she had written, it was the biggest therapy. I had mapped out my life and looked at it. I had gotten so much out of it. The stuff I learned, the stuff I needed to hash out. It's amazing. But it was Ellen Giorgio.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing, and I heard your voice. I didn't hear her voice. I heard you speak, which was amazing. Which another question is, have you been journaling all these years? Because the details of some of these events are pretty detailed, like when you took your mom to Rome and you described all the stuff that she bought and how they wrapped it, or what happened with your friend when you got beat up by 3 guys in LA, I think, San Francisco. I mean, like there were really, really details that I kept thinking to myself, I'm sure he's been journaling this, because how can you remember? So I'm curious about that part as well.
I'll tell you. No, I have not been journaling. I have not.
Okay.
But I'll tell you something, which is very important. While writing, I stopped somewhere because every day I would go up to my mom, upstairs to my mom and my siblings. We're a very, very close family. And I'd tell them, "Oh, mom, I'm trying to hash out more details for a particular story. Do you remember when this happened? Do you remember when that happened?" A couple of times, it would be an important story, and I would tell the story about a particular issue, and my siblings and my mom would look at me and say, that didn't happen. I'm like, what do you mean? It was traumatic to me. How come it didn't happen? I feel, I'm very passionate about it. No, it didn't happen this way at all. It happened in this way. A couple of stories. I had to run down to Ellen and call her up and said, stop the book. I must be lying. I must be making up stories. Hella. It turns out, and I called up my friends, therapist friends, psychologist friends, and what is going on? Do I need to go check my head? Because I could swear this is how it happened. It turns out, and this is something for all of us, for those who have been displaced, everybody who has become a refugee or displaced, and it doesn't have to be from one country to another. I say it to you, Zyad, as an Iraqi. I say it to anyone who's Palestinian, Cypriot, Irish, whatever, anyone, and anyone who has gone through a trauma or traumas. When we go through traumas, there's a threshold to how much your soul or your brain or your emotions can handle.
Can handle, yeah.
And so once it comes close to that threshold, your brain plays something on you and changes the story so you can handle it.
Yes.
Otherwise, you'd flip.
Yes.
And
Absolutely
this is
right.
what was going on. I had been traumatized. Everybody's been traumatized.
Yes.
But some more than others. And to me, the expulsion from Kuwait was traumatic. And because my whole being was displaced. I wasn't just physically displaced. I was emotionally displaced. It is the country I loved. Kuwait. I sing Kuwaiti. When I joke in the house, we speak with a Kuwaiti accent. With Zyad yesterday, the words just come up because his accent is a little closer. I flipped with a bit of Kuwaiti.
Yes.
So to be traumatized and removed and displaced, I shelved a lot of stuff because and I would be at the airport, like at London Heathrow, and I would look out the window from my plane, and I'd see a Kuwait Airways. I'd turn my head. And I couldn't handle seeing Kuwait Airways. It was too painful. It's like when you go to a horror movie and it's very gory, and you watch, and then subconsciously it's going to get really gory. And what do? You do this.
Yeah.
Because you can't handle. It's the same. Your body and your soul and your psyche does that to you and changes the story. So I kept discovering different ways of how I was traumatized, how my father and his siblings were traumatized by their expulsion and by what had happened in Ma'arakat Jenin al-Kubra, the great war of Jenin. I tell you again, this book has so many avenues that a lot of people will identify with that have nothing to do with LGBTI. They just all come together. So no, I did not journal. No, I didn't journal. But some stories are vivid, some stories are not.
Are vague. Yeah. It's amazing book. I myself am excited to receive my copy and read, and we advise all followers to read it. As you said, it's not a book about LGBTQ community only. It's about self-realization, identity, homeland, living in diaspora, and displacement. Natasha, do you have other questions for our guest? Because I want him now to make a promise to us on the air to come back again for another podcast about LGBT activism in the Arab world.
I would
I
love
So,
think
to.
I think my last question would be, what does the future hold for the LGBTQ community and the refugee community, especially in the Arab world? What does the future look like?
We'll get there in our own time. But I think there's other stuff we need to work on before we get to LGBT. Uh, we need to eat. Yeah, I mean, equality is very important. I mean, we need to take care of our women.
Mm,
There's so many issues where we need to put our women as well up there again. Yani growing up with a yani, and I grew up with matriarchy is so important. My mother, my
mm,
aunties, their teachers, their influencers at that age, you know, this is what we grew up with in the Arab world. Our women were there. There was equality between men and women, historically in the Arab world. Yani Prophet Muhammad's wives. One of them led an army, the other one was a businesswoman. She asked the Prophet for his hand in marriage. She asked. So we've had it, we've lost it. So for the Arab world coming forth into the future, we need to take care of our women. We need to equalize that, and this will come with it as well. Once you work on one big equal rights issue, other issues will follow as well. We'll get
yeah,
there. We
yes.
will.
yeah, we will.
Madian, our audience and followers have been sending you lots of love messages and saying hello from different
Thank
parts
you.
of the world. Amira Omum is sending her a greeting, saying good afternoon to all. Ibn Battuta Safar saying hi. My friend Dawood Zgoura from Morocco says hi to everyone, and
Oh, that's
especially
beautiful.
hello to you,
That's
Median.
beautiful.
My co-host Manoon Shalabi, Minan Shalabi from Canada, she's saying hello. Ali Muhammad from Iraq, I'm connected with you. Lovely interview, inside out. Rula Malki saying good day to all from Washington, D.C. Great
Hi,
book
Rula.
indeed.
I know Rula.
Yeah. And my friend Khaled from Germany is saying lots of love to you. And also, he is describing you as a beautiful soul, an activist who provides a lot of help and humanitarian aid inside and outside the Hashemite kingdom. Big love to you, dear sir. And
Bless you.
also,
Thank you.
Rula say again hello, and she's responding to your hello. So she's been with us throughout the podcast, and thank you for following, Rula. I think I'm done with my questions, Natasha. If you don't have, do you still have anything to ask our guest?
Just thank you very much and stay safe, Midian. And I can't wait to go back to Amman
Thank you.
to go to Booksa Cafe and eat the amazing food and drink. Actually, I have one last question. What's the secret to your amazing coffee? Where do you get the beans from?
Believe it
uh,
or not, local roasters.
really? Oh, wow.
Amman has become such a beautiful place. I love Amman. I love it.
Me
I love
too.
it. There's so much going on. There's so much
So
going on.
hopefully, Natasha and I in the future we come together. Natasha, take care.
Ahla
Yeah.
wa sahla.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay,
Take it.
so thank you so much, Median. I want you please to promise
You're
me
very
to
welcome.
come back again in a second podcast to talk about LGBTQ activism in the Arab world, and we'll talk more about gay rights and all the other uh, beautiful work that you do for the help of the LGBTQ community in the Arab world. So, finally, thank you for coming. Thank you, Natasha, and thank you for all friends who wrote to us and participated in the podcast. This is Zyad Tariq Rasheed, Natasha Tynes, and Madian Al-Jazerah saying goodbye to you all. Goodbye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.